Hi, Yan Sen. How are you?
Been a quick minute. Doing well. Yourself?
I'm very good, thanks. Very good. Quite a nice morning in Athens. Sun's just coming out, so
It's yeah. I was just about to ask, how is the harsh Mediterranean winter over there?
well, it's a winter, right? I haven't experienced a winter where I've lived for a number of years, so just having a winter. And they had snow last year. It didn't snow this year, at least not yet.
Yeah.
But it's nice. You do miss something when you lose the seasonality to the year. I always think life passes quicker when you don't have significant changes to kind of slow that pace down.
And 新年快乐. I know your wife's Chinese, so maybe you know and you celebrate Lunar New Year.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been doing our best here, though. Of course, it's a very different experience from celebrating Chinese New Year in a Chinese majority country, but we did our best. We had a nice spread on the table that my wife prepared. Yeah, you have the old gala on in the background. But
right.
Yeah, it's nice.
So John, you and I, we've known each other for a really long time now. I think almost close to 10 years. But for our audience who might not be as familiar, did you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Yan Sen. So I'm originally from the UK. I began my career in recruitment advertising, which some may be familiar as an industry. Spent a number of years working across a number of agencies, including TMP, which is a name that many people in the industry recognize. I decided to take my skills in-house, moved to a role with HSBC, which is a global marketing role supporting graduate recruitment, and specifically the investment bank and that side of the business. When that contract came to an end, I was telling someone the other day, I think I've spent my whole working life trying to keep warm, and I felt it was time to make that move out of London. And so I jumped on a plane, met with a lot of recruiters across Asia, took a role in Macau in a recruitment firm where I stayed for 2 years. Then after that, a really interesting role came up with BASF, supporting both the regional HR communications, but also leading their regional recruitment COE, which had been disbanded during the global financial crisis. So it was, really setting that back up from scratch. And I was in Hong Kong for 5 years, had my first child, decided to move to the fresher air of Singapore, where I joined Dyson, and then after that, Dimension Data, and then moved on from there to Kantar, all the time leading regional recruitment teams. And in Kantar, I moved to a global recruitment role. And then most recently, just over a year ago, I decided it was probably time to start to move closer to my roots, although not as far back as the UK. So I took a role, moved to Athens with a company called Dialectica, and I'm leading the global talent acquisition for Dialectica. So quite a journey. I guess I've worked for companies of very different sizes across different industries, typically kind of larger, more mature organizations. Dialectica is a little bit different. Anyone who's not familiar with the company, we're a B2B information services firm, and we serve the world's top business professionals by enabling them to gather real-time information and insights from industry experts. We're a company of about 1,400 people globally. We are growing significantly. We are the fastest growing industry in our market. And across 6 offices, 3 continents, a really exciting business. I guess what's been interesting for me from a professional point of view is, as I said, I've normally been in organizations that are larger, a bit more mature in terms of age of the company at least. Dialectica, we're having our 10th anniversary this year. So it's been really interesting to kind of see the differences in an organization, both in terms of pace, how you have to react. So that's something that really excited me actually, and led a lot of my decision to join Dialectica, and it's one I'm really happy with a year in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And from your experience at Kantar, were you able to kind of utilize some of that in your current role? There seem to be some similarities in terms of the business.
Yeah, I think fundamentally as a recruiter, there are probably 5 or 6 areas that you work through, right? Data, your employer brand, operational team, organization. So the fundamental role is the same. Your goal is to hire 100% of roles with as quality candidates as you can and in as quick a time as possible. So the recruitment job itself, in terms of the basic requirements, are quite simple. Once you do that, you can really layer on top. So you take the same approach to a team of 500 recruiters as you would to 2. I guess the company's in very different stages. Kantar was under private equity, so it was moving in a certain direction, streamlining. The business itself was changing considerably, and it's partly automation and I guess AI latterly. So yes, very different size organizations, but I think what we do as recruiters is it's pretty simple. You need to know the candidate, you need to give the candidate a great experience, you need to understand your team, your process, leverage technologies, leverage data. That's not saying that my role hasn't got more complicated year on year as you're expected to deliver more. But fundamentally, you know what you have to do to please your board.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I invited you onto this podcast, John, is I find you as a thought leader in the TA space, and whenever I visit Singapore, when you were based there, I do make an effort to kind of reach out to you and have a conversation. We always book like an hour, and it ended up being like 2, sometimes even 3. Yeah, I remember that walk around Botanical Gardens. We walked the entire park from memory. In any case, you have not only kind of experience these different organizations within different industries, but you've been in kind of the regional role and now in kind of this global role. So yeah, I kind of want to get your insights on how you're seeing, I guess, the global talent market and the movement around the world. And just to kind of set the context, for me, I could kind of see it from Japan, where a few years ago, during the COVID pandemic, China had a very severe lockdown, and also that coupled with it taking away a lot of the freedoms of Hong Kong. A lot of the Hong Kongers fled, and they moved, some to the UK, some moved to Singapore and other parts of the world. So there's that talent movement happening from that perspective. And then there's also from a company perspective, right? If you are based in a developed country, you might think about offshoring some of your headcount to other parts of Southeast Asia, for example, to kind of reduce the headcount cost. So yeah, couple of ideas there, but John, do you want to kind of talk around kind of the talent dynamics around the world that you're seeing?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a big topic, right? And you could spend days discussing the challenges we face. There are big existential talent challenges ahead, right? Some of those, like AI, have really arrived quite quickly, at least for those of us who have been working on them. And we've seen, I think a role like translation. The moment we had ChatGPT launched, probably 40-50% accuracy increase in using the tool for translation. So it's made large changes overnight. We know it's also going to be changing how we all work. And I think we were discussing the World Economic Forum report that came out a few weeks ago, where they're looking at the core skills over the next 5 years, how they predict they're going to change, and it's pretty clear you're looking at a move away from, if you like, technical skills, for want of a better term, through to those softer skills, which ironically the skills that you needed when I started working. So if I just take recruitment, we've probably had the last 20 years where many recruiters have grown up on LinkedIn. They've done most of their interactions either on LinkedIn or other channels like WeChat or WhatsApp. That candidate connection, in many cases, has been automated, right? That's not going to work anymore. And those recruiters who only know that process are very quickly going to be automated away. So we need to look at what are the skills we need beyond that. It's interesting from a Dialectica perspective. We hire a lot of young people between 0 to 3 years experience. So it's an area I've been really looking into. And what we talk about with them is the skills that they will typically build with us, things like resilience, empathy, negotiation. We look for lifelong learning. We look for these core skills, and then we build them, and suddenly these are top right quadrant skills. So the skills that are going to be copper bottomed over the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that divide is pretty clear. AI will remain a co-pilot. It will do a lot of even the thinking for us. And that means that, humans will be defending their domain of interactions. And if we just look at data, for example, data is fantastic. I think it's, I just think every year we get better at producing reports, mixing data sets up, comparative data, predictive data. But really, what is the thing that pulls people's hearts, right? It's the narrative, it's the story. So that's where that dividing line is for me. And that's just one of the challenges we face. You're sitting in Japan, which is, I think, known the demographic challenges were coming. And it's not to say it's not coming to most countries over the next 10, 20 years, but Japan's kind of at the vanguard there in terms of, decreasing working population. If I'm on LinkedIn, I'm still seeing people facing age discrimination. You're 51, so you're not a cultural fit. You're 50 years old. We want someone with more energy. And I'm afraid, we're very quickly arriving at the point where obviously that's not ethical anyway, but it's also not going to wash from a company perspective because there simply aren't enough people to do the jobs that need to be done. And again, going back to the World Economic Forum report, we're not seeing, there's no prediction that AI is going to take away 90% of jobs and we can all sit on the beach. as nice as that would be, it's going to create more. And if anything, you know, these will be different jobs, they will be changed jobs, they will be jobs in different areas, but they will be replacing what came before. So yeah, I think that pace of change is really what, you know, I mean, we've always had change, I think, if I think back ever since I've been working, but just the pace in the last 2-3 years, we've had COVID, we've had ups and downs. Even just if I look in my area of recruitment, there's been, you know, people losing jobs, taking new jobs, and now, you know, a lot of thoughts about, you know, for everyone in every industry, I think, in 5 years' time, will I still have a job? Well, do I have to retrain? Will I constantly have to retrain? I guess there's an excitement to that, but also a challenge as well, and a big pressure on both governments and companies to make sure that people are educated in the right way, and also supported in that journey. I guess one last point on that. So I do speak to a lot of graduates in my role, and I find that many of them have their hearts set on a career that they were told about 3-4 years ago when they started their studies. And sometimes I gently remind them that it's probably a career that's not going to be around for very long, and that they should look a few years forward and try to make their decisions about whether the career they want is going to be around, you know, once we've continued this development in AI and automation and other areas.
Yeah, John, you touched upon a lot of different topics, but just to kind of double click on that last one, it's really interesting to kind of read in recent weeks where there was a report that MBA graduates in the US, a third of them are struggling to find new roles in corporates, right? Before, you know, it was automatic, MIT, Harvard, you get your MBA, you land a 6-figure job out of the bat right away. But that's no longer the case. What is your opinion on that? How do you read the situation? There is kind of like higher education no longer of significant value.
I think in itself, no. I definitely believe education is going to go through significant change, and it needs to, both in terms of how it's delivered, and AI is going to shake that up, but also in terms of what people are learning, right? I've got 2 pretty young kids, and when I think about them going through school, and I look ahead 10 years, I'm constantly asking myself what they're learning and how will it be important to them. And of course, not everything in education is to do with your future career, right? There's a lot of areas within that about personal development, etc. But as you get closer to, let's say, people entering the workforce or people studying MBA, which, you know, used to be you do 7-8 years work experience and then you do an MBA. I think a lot of people now probably just go straight into an MBA to improve their chances of getting a job. So people need to think about what are the studies giving you? Are you staying and doing a master's just for the sake of it, or is there something tangible that you're learning because of it? Those are questions I ask, right? If you're constantly studying just because you don't quite know what work you want to do, or, you know, you enjoy that lifestyle, that's great, but it's not necessarily taking you closer to being employable. So yeah, I think people really need to think about what it is they're learning. Education for education's sake, you know, it's good on a personal basis, but if you're thinking about the professional aspect of it, what are you learning and how are you going to apply it? And that's not to say everything is about technical skills, but there should be a reason why you're doing it, and you should be able to justify why you're doing it. And we definitely, one of the skills that people are going to need in the future, even more than they have in the past, is this ability to keep learning, to keep driving their knowledge. I've always typically done that on my own. I've had a bit of a curiosity, and I think it pays to look a few years into the future to know what's happening in your industry. But people have to be better at that, and they have to understand what the changes are going to be, and make sure they're keeping themselves up to date with relevant skills. And if we're talking about work, skills that are marketable, because those are changing. And if you believe LinkedIn, 30% of the skills that we are hiring for now, in 3 to 5 years' time, are going to be gone. We're not going to need them. So people need to be a bit more aggressive, I think, about what they're learning, and how that's applied. So I think it's, I would never say education or further education is a waste of time, but it absolutely needs to be relevant to what you want to do. If you want to be an academic, then you go one way. If you want to use that to get a foothold in the corporate world, you have to be doing something that is in some way relevant, and is, it's not just a year that you've spent paying money to do something, to get a certificate.
Yeah, it's so important to kind of have this growth mindset, right? And even for the talent acquisition profession, I was speaking to the head of APAC for recruitment at Adobe just the other day, and he said, talent acquisition has really changed. So before it was about getting CVs, managing the interview process, but now look at talent acquisition. You're basically like a data scientist. You need to be a storyteller, overlaying that on top of the data. You need to be good at managing the different stakeholders in the process. You got to be familiar with labor law. You got to be familiar with the HRIS system. There's just so much more that you need to be knowledgeable about to be effective as a talent acquisition.
Yeah, and look, go back further. You just needed a Rolodex and a phone. So, I'm not saying that we may not come full circle at some time, but you're right. As I've moved through my career, the complexity of the role I've been doing has changed every year. The data is a good example. When I started working, it was pretty basic. It was Excel 97. Most people could use it on a very basic level. And then now, not everyone needs to be an expert on Tableau and Power BI, but you need to understand the data. You need to understand the potential of the data, and then be able to translate that for your audience, right? And make decisions or proposals based on that data. And that's just one thing. As you said, stakeholder management, managing, I'm sure organizations have become more complex, maybe less structured, more stakeholders, more mobility, employer branding, marketing, social media, all these different areas in and of themselves have become more complex. And as you get more senior, of course, you're not expected to know every one of these in and out, but you're supposed to be able to manage teams sitting over them. So, and I guess we've discussed this before, the other area of interest for me is that I see a great kind of unifying of talent, because in the past you'd say, okay, well, this is our external hiring, right? This is our internal mobility. This is our learning and development, where we put people into training courses, often quite randomly, or on a certain kind of company mandated level. Really now, we need to see everything within that same lens, because you can spend a lot of money going to market for talent, whether it's internal or external resources you're using, where actually there's a cheaper, more efficient, potentially quicker solution internally. And that might be development, it might be moving people through, it might be reskilling. So in order to have those commercial conversations, you need to see the whole picture, and you need to be a lot more strategic, to be honest, than most companies really are in this area. You need to look ahead, you need to look at your changing needs, and start to put those paths in place. And you can't do that if talent acquisition isn't talking to talent management, if learning and development is not tied into that whole piece. And that's obviously takes you down what is obviously a really interesting area, which is the whole conversation about skills at the moment. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity, but it does mean, if you're in talent acquisition, it's another area for you to really get your head around, which for me, I think is an exciting one, because it's more strategic. And of course, if you're going to show your value, I think, and I say this to agency vendors I work with, I said, look, I would rather use your services on a conscious level, rather than because I've misjudged the resources in my team and I need to throw roles out. I'd rather use you because you're the right option. And I think that's also benefits you as an agency, because you want to work on roles that are, where you're adding value, rather than just a panic because we've got not enough resources and too many roles. So yeah, I think that whole skills piece, how we navigate it, the lens we look at that through, being more strategic. These are all tremendous opportunities, but in a world where 30% of skills are going to be disappearing every 5 years, I don't know the data on how many companies, drop away every year, but it certainly seems to be ramping up compared to 20 years ago. So that how we manage that change, we need to be a lot more organized, a lot more strategic about what we do, and then execute in a unified manner.
Yeah, you kind of need to go through this decision tree, right? When you have an opening, do you look internally or externally? And even if you look externally, are you doing direct sourcing? Are you using agencies? Are you using job boards? Are you using referrals? And you could just go deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole, depending on these decisions that you make. One thing that kind of came to mind when you said all that is the world is moving very, very quickly. Organizations are now more complex. It's a matrix organization now, and you might have local reporting, you have regional reporting, you have global reporting. And what I'm seeing is a lot of organizations, because of this complexity, are now kind of more siloed in terms of their thinking than before. And so it's very, very difficult to kind of get all of the necessary information that you need to create a holistic or strategic approach. But I think in an ideal world, that approach does sound great, because you need that to make the right decisions and to have an effective organization. I think in relation to all of the skills that are kind of needed changing constantly, as pointed out by the LinkedIn data you just mentioned, there is work insecurity, right? So with AI coming into the fold, you're seeing a lot of the tech companies doing rounds and rounds of downsizing a couple of years back, and that's really affected the talent acquisition teams. There being a lot of retrenchment. What are your feelings for kind of 2025? You know, is there still that work insecurity around talent acquisition, or do you think it's going to come back, this particular function?
Yes, I'm bullish on talent acquisition, but then I would be. I think if you think about talent acquisition, I think something like 70% of the investment in the HR technology space is in talent acquisition, right? So most of the money invested in the whole HR tech area is in TA tools or tools around TA. So it's an area that people generally see as a cost. And of course, we have to be better in talent acquisition about showing the value of what we do. But that's a whole other conversation. So we are an area where if you're an HR technology provider, you probably think there's an opportunity for an investment. You're probably selling into CEO or board level your tool. And so I think we've gone through the first phase of AI can do everything your TA team does. But you and I know as well as anyone that recruitment is not about, it's not in most cases a simple process like going to the supermarket and buying a bottle of milk. It's a much different process. It's a much more personal process. It's in many cases finding someone who isn't aligned, maybe hasn't even heard of your company. There's a good chance they haven't thought about joining your company. They may not even know that you hire, right? Or you exist. So there's been a lot of discussion about moving everything to AI, but I think the same is true in sales, right? The AI will do a lot of co-piloting. It can provide you with the information you need to sell. It can provide you information about the person you're speaking to. It can provide you information about the company you're selling into, maybe the challenges in the industry environment. So maybe you don't have to have that good a knowledge of the industry vertical you're selling into, because AI can probably provide you with information about that. But that human interaction is critical. And I flew into the UK last year, and in the airport I went into one shop to buy a sandwich, and it was a automated machine. I went into another shop to get a newspaper or something, and again it was an automated cash machine. And maybe because I've been in countries like Singapore, Athens, and Greece, where things are still a little bit more personal in that shop front area, it did leave me feeling a bit cold. So, well, I've come home, but I've had no human interaction with everyone. Maybe I'll go and get a coffee because there's a human serving that coffee. So, that's just a small thing, but we want those interactions, and we definitely want those interactions when we're discussing something like our career. Now, good recruiters, I'm sure you'll agree, are also career coaches, right? They're someone who can discuss where you are in your career, understand what's good for you as a next move. They're generally not going to sell you a role that's not right for you, because it's in no one's benefit. But they act beyond, let's say, a matchmaker, saying, here's a role, here's a person, bomb, there you go. So as long as there are those kind of qualitative interactions, you're going to need humans there. But of course, there is a whole piece within recruitment, let's say inbound applications, assessments, that we can look to automate, but automate because it's the right thing to do. And of course, making sure that we are conscious of any potential biases coming into that process. On your other point about job insecurity, I think it's not just recruitment. It's been a tough time for recruitment, definitely. I think 2025 will start to see things come around, because one of the features that's been quite interesting is quite a lot of kind of mid-level people moving into senior positions. And part of that, I think, in the organization side is cost saving. But I think what is actually going to unravel over time is the fact that if you do need to partner with your talent acquisition team to go through this talent transformation, to go through the skills mapping and planning and the strategy, you need someone with a bit more experience. So I think that'll be the first piece, where perhaps companies realize the person they've got cannot join them on that, let's say, that talent journey. Although having said that, I've seen the same thing leaking into HR as well. But there is value people bring at that strategic level. But the interesting thing about recruitment is you can do it operationally, right? You can get the numbers, but what that's not going to give you over time is sustainability. It's not going to allow you to transform, to leverage new technologies, simply because of the experience of the person leading it. So that's one thing. I'm very, I'm positive on recruitment. I think what we do, we will very quickly leverage the new technologies that we have at our hand, and there's going to need to be an adjustment in many recruiters' ways of working to leverage that and to strengthen the skills that remain. And I think it's a great opportunity, because recruiters have a fantastic set of skills that lend itself to other parts of HR. And if I was hiring let's say, a head of talent, I would typically be looking at a head of TA and the set of skills they bring in to that. But I think that job insecurity is more widespread, and something we mentioned last time I talked. My father had a career with one organization. He was a banker. He worked for one bank, and he moved through. The bank looked after him. He had a nice pension, retired early, etc. In maybe 2-3 generations, that's completely changed. I was looking. One of the other reports I like to look at is the Edelman Trust Barometer. Not sure if you're familiar with that. And we have a quick look. We find that job insecurity, according to the Trust Barometer, is increasing quite considerably. So the question is, what are the percentage of employees who worry about their job security being threatened by, first is globalization, and there's plus 5%, this is year on year, international trade conflicts, foreign competitors 6%, offshoring 6%. Then economic pressures, plus 3%, looming recession, plus 5% automation, plus 2% lack of training. So people are worried, right? And trust is down. Down 3 points year on year in organizations, in governments. So we're in a world and
nobody's happy.
Yeah, well, look, it used to be you had a tech skill, you're a developer, that your role was copper bottomed, that you had a public sector job, you're an iron rice bowl kind of opportunity, and you were set for life. But we look at what's happening in the US in the public sector now. We look at the job losses across the tech landscape. It's really difficult, and we're definitely going to have to look at there's certain end games to this that are quite extreme. Universal basic income, which takes us to a certain place. But if much of this is at the governmental level, what can we do ourselves, I think, is do what I mentioned before, which is look ahead, try and keep your skills where they should be. But it is a tough environment, and I think this has a big drag on people's mental health in the workplace, because not only do you have to be resilient for the change in your job, the complexity of dealing in companies these days, but you also have that dragging insecurity that even if you're doing your job really well, it could be gone tomorrow. And that's a feature that has changed considerably in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And I think over the next few years, we'll start to see the impacts of that. But, generally people will spend less. You'll have fewer families having children, because why would you when, you don't know if your income's going to be cut away? Would you invest in a property that has a 40-year mortgage if you're not sure whether you'll still be able to pay that mortgage in 5 years' time or 2 years' time? So, yeah, I think that's a feature that is a real existential threat, but probably not thinking about that as much as we should. And what are the impacts of that?
You're from the UK. Do you know Hung Lee, who's kind of like
Yes.
a PA influencer? Yeah. So I was speaking to him just I think a few days ago, and he mentioned that last year there's this huge boom of mass apply AI, where candidates have these agents where they could apply to hundreds and thousands of jobs in their sleep, right? And that's really overwhelmed talent acquisition teams. And now coming into this year, the companies are going to try to battle that with the 2FA, two-factor authentication, to make sure people are actually people. Humans are actually humans when they're making the application. And so I think when a lot of companies rely on technology, they're trying to reduce the cost of recruitment, but actually what happens is the talent pool is the same. The number of jobs is the same. You kind of playing cat and mouse with the apply rejection process and try to create efficiencies, but all of the money then flows into the technology. And it's similar to LinkedIn as well. I mean, we use LinkedIn, of course, as an agent, but you can utilize their job slots. And when you have their job slots, you have lots and lots of applications. But how many of those applications are actually suitable for the role? Single percentile, right? If you're lucky. Sometimes zero.
It's frustrating. It is
open for 1 or 2 months. And what happens? You have to pay for these job slots. You don't get the result. You need to put in the effort to manage the applicants. If you don't reject them or give them some sort of response, then it's bad candidate experience. So you're paying for a tool that's not generating results. Please don't ban me, LinkedIn. So we have this idea that technology is going to be solving all of our problems. And sometimes it's just a pipe dream, right? It's not actually a solution. Obviously, there are tools like assessment tools and tools to help arrange interviews, taking transcriptions of interviews. Those are very useful. But I think companies need to be worried that, just because it's AI, just because it's technology, it's going to be effective. It's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. And, I've experienced candidates on a virtual interview who were quite clearly feeding my questions into ChatGPT or similar,
Wow.
and reading the answers out. But then, 10 years ago, I was handling candidates who were sending someone else to the interview who originally came up. So we've always faced these challenges. I also think expectations have changed. If I see a candidate who's applied for 20 roles in my company in the last 6 months, There is a part of me that thinks this is someone that really wants to work for us.
Yeah.
But there's the recruiter in me that says this is someone that doesn't know what they want to do. And wanting to work at my company is one thing, but not knowing what skills you're bringing and identifying them with the job role is another. So, there is this sense that it's just a numbers game. And if I apply for 1,000 roles while I'm sleeping, then perhaps 2 or 3 of those will stick. But it's more likely that you're just going to get 1,000 rejections. Will this change? I know there's. I know that the ATS companies are starting to look at tools where they can identify AI-generated applications and CVs, as you say, 2FA. For me, when I've been, I don't, I will always be hiring the occasional role or two myself. It's not my core role, but when I am, I find often these days it's easier for me just to headhunt rather than post the role and have, as you say, 95% of candidates who have not even done the job or don't have any of the skill sets I require. And if you were speaking to them one-to-one, my question would be, why do you think you're right for this role? Because you've not done anything related to what I'm looking for. So at best, you've not read the job advert. So and often it's easier just to go out to the market instead of processing those applications and finding that the quality is not there. Now, that is quite different for, if you like, the more volume hiring we do in Dialectica. That's an area where we focus on soft skills. There are some challenges with looking for soft skills. To a certain degree, you're looking for things that are more difficult to measure. I can test someone's coding ability with a online whiteboard and put them through a test. Testing someone's resilience is something of a different matter. So something we introduced last year is kind of open assessment days where we bring people in, we bring candidates in. It gives them a chance to spend time with our people, see if, learn about the roles we have inside and out, learn about the company. And, it gives them a chance to look at us, and it gives us a chance to look at them. And you can see a lot more with someone, how they work in a different environment. We have them working in small groups. We might have them in large groups. We might then do an interview at the end. For me, that's a much better way to see how someone, is likely to perform, focusing on soft skills and looking at things like, resilience, how they work in a team, things like creative thinking, active listening. We have settled for kind of online interviews a bit too much, I believe. And there are ways in which those can be abused. And we've definitely found, particularly for this group, you can really see a lot more about, what someone's about, their soft skills, than on a video interview, for example.
John, I'm going to go off on a tangent a little bit. Recently, I was watching TV. I don't watch TV very often, but I was watching TV and I saw this middle-aged gentleman, and he's like a software engineer or gamer or whatnot. He's working with a PC like all day, and he's transitioned from eating 3 meals a day to just having protein shakes. And so he would have like 2 or 3 protein shakes. And apparently, he's gone into really good health, so he's lost weight. You don't get the grogginess after a heavy lunch, and he's able to kind of focus more and be more productive. And it's the most bizarre thing, right? So he's recently married, and so he's having meals with his wife, and he'll just be drinking his shake, and then his wife will be having a full meal. And this got me thinking, okay, we've got AI, we've got robotics, you have kids, so they're all like on Minecraft and Roblox all day in this virtual world. We got all of these goggles, right? Meta Oculus and the Vision Pro and whatnot. We're almost like pushing ourselves to live in the Matrix, right? You and I were old enough to know the movie, the Matrix. Like, we're not enjoying kind of reality anymore. Yeah, I thought that was just really, really interesting. And I see how kind of us moving in that direction.
Yeah, I remember the film Tron, which was even before the Matrix. Yeah, I think it's interesting. We do have generations coming through that are, for obvious and documented reasons, do struggle with some of those soft skills that we talked about. I made the point recently that if you're hiring graduates now, many of them are. We have to understand that many of them are what you might call the COVID generation. These are people whose development was to a certain extent disrupted by COVID. Spending a year, 2 years at home. See, depending on, I know in Japan it wasn't really locked down as such, but in most markets around the world it was. And how has their development been arrested? Typically, that goes after soft skills. And if you're a generation that's already comfortable communicating on your phone rather than through face-to-face interaction, then it's just going to double down on that. So I think you're right. The way we live now is very different. We have everything we want pretty much on demand. If you want something, you can have it delivered potentially the same day. So we've probably in the generations coming through, let's say the younger two generations, we're probably lacking as a generational group those soft skills, which are the ones that are going to be enduring and become more important. So that's something we really have to think about. At Dialectica, it's something that we provide a lot of training about. We look for people who have those base skills, and then we work on it, we develop. And I think that's something we need to think about, is if we're moving from a world of technical skills to a world of soft skills, how do we build those? Is our education system developing resilience? Is our education system developing, people's ability to negotiate, to manage conflict? I would say probably not. We've taken competition out of a lot of school systems, maybe less so in Asia, but certainly in Western Europe, you have a sports day. No one comes first, second, third. No one. There's prizes for everyone, and so it's definitely a challenge. So are we developing and growing the skills, even as a core, that we're going to need for the generations who in 5 years' time are going to be making up the majority of the workforce? I think it says something to the longevity of the older generations now, because I think, and I'll say we, meaning myself, I think we have that. I just about grew up in that era where you needed a phone and the Rolodex. So those skills are coming back.
say on the same train of thought, we're obviously embracing AI and trying to implement it to increase the efficiency of our workflow. But the danger is that, as you pointed out, when candidates are chatting on ChatGPT during the interview and regurgitating the answer, it's no longer a co-pilot situation. We've basically outsourced our thinking. We're outsourcing the way we interact with other people, and that can be very, very dangerous. So I think on top of all of the soft skills, we just need to be human. Humans need to be human, and that's, I think, going to allow us to stand out and be competitive.
I think if I have a calculator, I don't have to know in my head what 238 times 467 is, but I've got to know the concept. Right? I've got to know the basis of that, even if I can't do that sum in my head. I think it's the same with AI. As you can't skip the components of what goes into something. So you may not have to write that presentation yourself, but you should understand the concept and the basis of it. I think that's a little bit of a worry for me is, are we bypassing, do we just have AI as a black box operating, making decisions for us? Do we know what those decisions are based on? And as AI starts to layer on top of AI, you then have, an automated tool making decisions layer upon layer. I think that's a bit of a risk for me, because you don't need to be able to change your battery, let's say, in your car, but you should know the basics of what is where, and be able to understand the basics of of an operation. And I think there is a danger of just kind of bypassing, because I don't need to know it. I don't feel I need to know it, that automated process.
It's a crazy world and lots happening. John, thank you very much for joining us and giving us a little bit of clarity. We're running out of time, but for those in our audience that want to connect with you or follow you, what is the best way to do that?
It's on LinkedIn. I'm only on LinkedIn, really. So please connect on LinkedIn. I try to post as regularly as I get time on everything related to talent acquisition, and occasionally interesting things that I come across.
Fantastic. And with that, we will wrap. John, thank you so much. Real pleasure.
Great. Thanks, Yan Sen. Great to speak.
Always an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Have a great day.